Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. Good morning. Today is September 28th, 2025, and we are pre-recording this episode of the New Possibilities Hour, part of the Will Work for Food project founded by Natalie Armstrong Motan. Once a week, I, along with Jean Lawler and David Shraga and Michael Schwimmer, are delighted to host another cutting-edge webinar for mediators, arbitrators, lawyers, and everybody who negotiates. Today we have kind of an interesting and unusual episode in that Michael and David, who are newer to the mediation field, asked for the opportunity to interview me. So I figured, okay, if they thought it would be valuable, maybe it'll be valuable for others as well. And I hope to learn a little something from the process too. So David and Michael have titled today's talk, Lessons from the Table and Hard-Won Wisdom, a dialogue between veteran and emerging mediators. It will be a dynamic, no-holds-barred conversation, these two gentlemen wrote, where practical wisdom meets fresh perspectives, and every answer could be the key to unlocking your next mediation breakthrough. They advise you to come prepared to scribble notes furiously as we decode the art of turning chaos into collaboration, one battle-tested strategy at a time. Before we dig in, though, everybody knows one of the best parts of the program each week is when we announce the running total of just how much our generous audiences have contributed to food banks since we began the series in 2020. Gentlemen, would you please do the honors?
I'd be happy to. We are marching towards $1 million, getting closer with every episode. Today we are at $878,000. Now, $878,984 and 33 cents. So thank you all for your generosity, and let's get the show on the road.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll turn to the bios. I'll be very brief with regard to myself. I've been a mediator for almost 30 years, and I'm very grateful that I've won some honors and awards for the work, including being ranked in Chambers Band 1 on the nationwide list. I'm a member of the American Law Institute, and I just love what I do. I went to college at the University of California, Berkeley, from which I graduated in 1977, and then Harvard Law School, where I graduated in 1980. Let's see now. Michael Schwimmer navigates conflict and solves problems with clarity and purpose. He has sat in virtually every chair, attorney with a global law firm, in-house legal counsel, CEO, and president roles in startup and multi-billion-dollar enterprises, and also as a board member working throughout the U.S. and Latin America. This unique background enables Michael to deliver a highly skilled, practical, and solution-oriented approach to mediation. Michael received his law degree from the University of San Francisco, undergraduate degree from UC Santa Barbara, magna cum laude, with additional education and training at the Stanford Graduate School of Business Executive Program and the Strauss Institute of Dispute Resolution at Pepperdine University Caruso School of Law. David Shraga is a mediator specializing in entertainment, media, and intellectual property matters, and has an intimate knowledge of television and film development, financing, production, and distribution across theatrical and digital streaming platforms. With his uncommon background as a litigator, studio executive, and deal maker, David understands both sophisticated litigation and how the entertainment industry functions from an insider's perspective. As a mediator, he uniquely combines all of these fields of expertise to craft practical settlements of complex and emotionally charged industry disputes. David received his law degree from the University of Southern California and his bachelor's degree from Yale University. He too trained at the Strauss Institute of Dispute Resolution at Pepperdine University Caruso School of Law, and I'm delighted to be in conversation with these two fine up-and-coming superstar mediators. We work together hand in glove on these programs every week, and they're just terrific guys. I'm delighted to talk with them. Let me say, in terms of designating a food bank, we are in the middle of the Jewish high holidays, so let's support a food bank in Israel. One of Israel's leading food banks is Leket, Leket dot org. That's Leket, Leket dot org. And they provide relief for food insecurity to everybody in the state of Israel. So if you're able to contribute to Leket at this time of the Jewish high holidays, we really appreciate your doing so, or to any food bank of your choice. With that, I guess it's time for the conversation to begin. So, Michael, David, the floor is yours.
Okay, David, you go first.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jeff. It's a privilege to be on this panel with both of you today. And thank you for being so gracious as always. I'll just note that the information concerning Leket is in the chat as well. So you can always go there to find the link, and please keep us posted or let us know about your contributions so we can keep track of it as part of our running total. So Jeff, we're going to jump around today and be asking you questions about different time points within mediations and different issues that come up. And we're going to try and focus on some of the difficult situations maybe mediators find themselves in and some of the tips and tricks that you may have utilized. So I was going to start by talking about mediations involving adjusters. And I think one of the situations that new mediators often find themselves in is they're dealing with an adjuster who has come to a mediation with perhaps a certain amount of authority. They've had the meetings already with the team. You get into the mediation and the facts aren't necessarily very different from what they might have expected as they head into the mediation based upon the briefs. But as the mediator, you're thinking perhaps that they didn't really come with a realistic perception or evaluation of what their potential exposure would be, or what some of the damages might look like, or how something might play in front of a jury. And I wonder, in those situations where potentially the adjuster is stuck, they're not willing to do more. Oftentimes the lawyer in the other room is saying we want them to call their boss and they need to get more authority. How do you deal with those situations? Do you try and get them off the box? How do you work with that situation to try and advance the mediation? Because what all the lawyers tell us is we want a mediator who can get us past these impasses and get things moving when we're at an impasse like that.
So, David, first let me object to the question as compound and complex.
Sorry, I have to give some context. Something to chew on.
So I will not instruct the witness myself not to answer. Let's go ahead and try to dig in. So, one of the first things to remember in dealing with insurance companies and insurance adjusters is to deal with them as full participants in the mediation. They have their own positions, they have their own interests, needs, and values that go beyond the positions. So when insurance is involved, and it is involved in so many mediations, both first party and third party cases, it's important to treat the people from the insurance company with the same respect you would treat anybody else. I try to find out, if it's not obvious, what insurance company is involved and who is going to be attending on behalf of the insurance company. And do I have permission to reach out, or will the defense side put me in touch with the people from the insurance company? Sometimes I'll solicit a brief from them. What is their position if there are, for example, coverage issues involved in a third-party case? Will the people who will be attending the mediation be open to a phone call or a video chat with me before the mediation to find out exactly what they care about and how they view the situation going in? What are the challenges that they face? What are their expectations of me? How can I help them? Because everybody's got to settle at the same time. You can't have some people settle and not have other people settle. The insurance carriers are often an important key to that. One thing that often is interesting in a mediation is the question in a third-party case of whether the insurance claims professionals want to speak directly to a third-party plaintiff. So let's take a very simple case. Somebody slips and falls and breaks an ankle in a premises liability case. You have the property owner. Property owner has a general liability policy. and you have an insurance company defending the case, perhaps under a reservation of rights, perhaps not. So there are questions of whether the representatives of that insurance company will want to speak directly to the plaintiff and the plaintiff's lawyer, or whether they will want all communication to go through the defense counsel. And sometimes it works out one way, sometimes the other. Some of the benefits of having the insurance representatives deal directly with the plaintiffs is that the insurance representatives are the new kids on the block. They are not the ones who've been locking horns with the plaintiff and the plaintiff's lawyer in depositions and courtroom appearances. And if there's been any of the animosity or bad blood or hostility that sometimes does grow in litigation, it oftentimes has not involved the insurance professionals directly. So sometimes it can help when the insurance professionals are willing to caucus and speak directly, or in a joint session, speak directly to the plaintiff and say, here's how we view the situation. Your case has these pluses, your case has these minuses. We think we have these defenses, some are maybe stronger than others. Here's how we go through the process of valuing it. And this is why we put on it the value that we do. So that the plaintiffs, who are typically less seasoned in litigation, understand why it is that they're not getting as much money as perhaps they want. And they also have the opportunity to engage with the insurance claims professionals because maybe those professionals have missed something. Maybe there's something of which they're unaware or to which they have not given proper weight. And one of the main reasons we're in the mediation is to make sure everybody has the most and best information possible on the basis of which to make decisions. Now, on the downside, sometimes people from insurance companies don't like to have direct communications with the plaintiffs, thinking that it may, in some sense, contribute to claim related to improper claims handling. And so in California, people will sometimes ask for what's called a white waiver, which is a waiver of any rights they might have under the California Supreme Court case of White versus Western Title to use mediation or settlement related information to establish a bad faith claim or other sort of claim regarding claims handling, how the claim was handled. So sometimes, we do what we can working with the California mediation confidentiality statute, white waivers if appropriate, if people want to try to set up a situation where we can have those conversations. Ultimately, we want everybody to think they've made the best decision under the circumstances. Clear, strong decisions in a calm, informed environment. I can't say that often enough. Clear, strong decisions in a calm, informed environment. That's what we're really trying to get in mediation. And if we can accomplish that, settlements follow very, very easily.
Super, super helpful and great overview, obviously. What I tease out from that in terms of a specific actionable strategy is if you feel like there's maybe folks are stuck, is to put them together, to give them the opportunity to have those conversations, to explain to each other and get to that point themselves if it's available.
Yes, there's the constant push and pull of, is the mediator going to help people negotiate better for themselves or start negotiating for them? And I think that's a key distinction between good and bad mediation. In good mediation, we help the people who are there do the best job humanly possible of performing their jobs. And that is, for the lawyers at least, and the insurance claims professionals many times, negotiating the best options possible for the clients. And then it's the client's job uh, to select. Do they want to settle? Do they not like the settlement option? What really is their best alternative to a negotiated agreement? Sometimes people do make a clear-headed decision. No, the folks on the other side are too greedy, too stingy. We can't settle the case today. That does occasionally happen. I don't think that's a failed mediation because it's still the right decision under the circumstances. So there are times when Everybody wants us to do all the shuttling back and forth. And there are good reasons why mediators push back and want to have the parties, their representatives communicating directly. There are basically three reasons, I think. One is that there's a passion and an emphasis and a oomph that the folks themselves can put behind their messages that we as mediators really can't. They're not our clients. It's not our case. We're not as familiar with it. That leads into the second drawback of having mediators doing all the shuttling, and that is, what if, God forbid, somebody asks a question? How do we know? We we're not really in the best position to answer follow-up questions. It's the lawyers, the party representatives, sometimes the parties themselves who are in the best position to answer those follow-up questions. So it's at least more efficient and almost all the time more accurate to have those follow-up questions answered by the people who know the answers best. Finally, there are judgment calls on confidentiality. And how much do you really want to disclose to the other side? When you're in the moment with them, you may decide, you know what, I thought I was going to be candid, more candid about this, but the time is not right. Or you may say to yourself, gee, I didn't think I should be quite so forthcoming about this or that subject, but the conversation is going well. The people on the other side of the table appear to be in here in real good faith. Maybe I want to disclose a little more. So being able to make those judgment calls about what to disclose and what not in the moment is a benefit of the direct communication, and I think it's a good idea for the lawyers themselves and sometimes their clients to be in charge of making those decisions.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm going to hop in here. Jeff, I call this the don't shoot the messenger problem. So now I don't want you to think that I'm stalking you online, but in another webinar, I heard you say, never appear to represent the other party. But if one side is making excellent, possibly game-winning arguments, how do you present them to the other side, giving them due weight without appearing to endorse those arguments and all the fallout that comes from appearing to favor one side?
So, uh, one of the great benefits of having gone to Harvard Law School in the 1970s is we learned by the Socratic method, sometimes painfully, sometimes joyously, but always very intensely. And if you paid attention, I tried to pay attention, what were these great professors doing? And I had some great professors, particularly in my first year classes where the Socratic method was relied upon. Uh, Bob Keaton in torts, Phil Arita in contracts, Lance Liebman in property, Abe Shays and Betsy Bartholet in civil procedure, Charlie Nesson in criminal law. They were all terrific. And I named them here on purpose because they were all so terrific. And so asking questions rather than making statements is really the best way, I think, to appear where you're not sponsoring or arguing with people. Anytime it starts to feel like arguing, anytime it starts to feel more like wrestling than dancing, you got to do something different. Because no mediator, I've never heard of a mediator winning an argument with somebody. I don't care. It could be Abraham Lincoln as your mediator. It doesn't matter. Why? Simple. Because clients understand that their lawyers are their fiduciaries, the ones with the duty of undivided loyalty, the ones who are there to be their champions and fight for them. The mediator, it's not entirely clear exactly what our ethical. It's not the same as the lawyers. At one level or another, we are perceived as the people who are there to squeeze out a deal. And so if there ever appears to be an argument between a mediator and a lawyer, the client is always going to side with their own lawyer. Because after all, we're paid half by the other side. We work for everybody. We're there to try to get deals if at all reasonably possible. It's our job to be committed to settlement where reasonably possible, but not attached to settlement for the sake of settlement. And clients understand that our job is different than their lawyers. So we can't win arguments. How do we set ourselves up to do that Socratic kind of questioning, sometimes a tough love kind of questioning? Well, we set ourselves up to do it through the mediation process when done properly. And when done properly, many times, not every time, but many times, that includes a joint session. And the joint session, if done properly, sets up that kind of questioning in a subsequent caucus where the real magic can happen. How do we do it? After we get people's mediation briefs, we have a chance to see them. Hopefully they're exchanged. Sometimes they're confidential to us. But we see them and we start to develop a sense of what are the issues that are really keeping people apart? What's the keystone? Where's the crux of it here? And then I like to have some kind of phone or video conversations with the lawyers once I get their briefs to find out, are these really the one or two key issues that are keeping people apart? What else do I need to know to be most helpful for you? I ask a bunch of open-ended questions. I like to ask about the personalities of the people involved, to find out who's getting along. Are there issues in the relationships between lawyers and their clients? And you get a sense of whether you can fashion a joint session that is not likely to end up in a temper outburst or some kind of emotional conflagration. I try to find one or two issues that can be discussed that make a difference. And something like the measure of damages, I think, is the perfect issue, an ideal issue for that, because it doesn't really implicate the conduct of the parties. Does the law allow for the benefit of the bargain or out of pocket? At the other end of the spectrum, I would put, for example, scienter. Were you merely mistaken, or did you really intend to deceive me, you SOB, right? I think that's a pretty bad issue to try to discuss in the presence of the people whose conduct is at issue. So if you can land on an issue or two that is not likely to be inflammatory, you can have a conversation, joint session. David, you're arguing for the benefit of the bargain. Michael, you're arguing for out of pocket. David, you say Hadley versus Baxendale applies this way. Michael, you say it applies some other way. Let's talk about benefit of the bargain versus out of pocket. Then we can go into a caucus and I can say, okay, David, you were arguing in there for the benefit of the bargain, and Michael was talking about the out of pocket, and he was talking about the Hadley versus Baxendale case, and he said it applied this way. Well, what about that? It seemed plausible. What do you think about that? And we can have a conversation in the presence of David's client about the keystone issues, and hopefully we begin the process of having the client start to consider, or consider more seriously, settlement options they had not considered or not considered seriously before as a result of participating in and listening to the conversation. By contrast, if we haven't had that joint session, tailored, narrow, focused, then I just go in there and I say, armed with your brief, Michael, and I say, okay, David, I understand the key issue here is the measure of damages. And I've got Michael's brief here. Michael says, Hadley versus Baxendale applies to the issue in the following way, yada, yada, yada. And all of a sudden, it looks like I'm Michael's surrogate in the debate. I'm no longer your partner in conversation, David, about what Michael had to say. And if a mediator starts to look like a surrogate in the debate, I think the mediator's opportunity to do the job properly, which is to help people consider new settlement possibilities, consider them seriously, is hampered because as Michael's surrogate in debate, the client is much more likely, I think, to side with you, the advocate, their champion, their fiduciary, just reflexively. And when that happens, we're not as effective. So I think that one of the critical skills, how do you measure mediation skill? And forgive me for rambling a little bit. It's hard to measure mediation skill. And I think a lot of lawyers face this challenge when they select mediators. How do they know who's really a good mediator versus who was simply a high status person in their previous job, whether it was as a judge or a senior partner in a law firm or senior executive in a company? How do you measure the intangible um, aspects of what makes a good mediator? I think one good proxy for that is, does the mediator have the ability, where appropriate, to manage a joint session? If you hear of a mediator who simply says, oh, I just never do joint sessions, I think there's real questions about that mediator's level of skill as a mediator. I'm not saying joint sessions are appropriate in every case, far from it. It's a case-by-case decision. Not all cases are appropriate. But where it is appropriate, a mediator has to be able to manage it. It would be like going to a litigator and having the litigator say, you know, I just don't do summary judgment motions. They never get granted. And when they do get granted, they always get reversed anyway. And you know what? I don't oppose them either, because even if you don't oppose them, much of the time they're not going to get granted. And if it gets granted against you, it'll be reversed on appeal. So I just don't bother. Now, you would laugh a litigator who said that out of the room. It's an essential tool, not appropriate in every case, but appropriate in many cases. And so similarly with the joint session and mediation, it's not appropriate in every case, but it's appropriate in many cases. And I think a mark of skill in a mediator is the ability to diagnose and then manage the joint session properly where appropriate.
So just a quick follow-up, because you've mentioned joint sessions a couple of times, Jeff. Do you find that parties are often reluctant to do a joint session? And if so, how much do you push to get them over that reluctance and into the room?
Michael, I'm going to have to ask you to repeat the question because I had a little internet hiccup there. Could you
Oh,
repeat the question, please?
sure. I was saying, if the parties are reluctant to go into joint session, how do you respond to that? Do you try to convince them to do it, or just walk away from that as a potential vehicle?
Well, we're there to serve the clients, and there's a sense in which the customer is always. So the question becomes, well, what's behind the lawyer's thinking? Maybe there's a very good reason. Maybe these people, if they sit down in the same room with each other, will just automatically become so inflamed and antagonized that it will just automatically shut everything else down. And if a lawyer tells you that doesn't matter if you put these people, can you put us on different floors of the building with different restrooms so that there's no chance of these people running into each other? We need to be on separate floors with separate restrooms and separate coffee machines. And these people must never see each other during the day. It would be toxic and poisonous. Well, if everybody agrees that it would just be so toxic and poisonous, then I think we should respect that.
Right.
Sometimes you have lawyers who have never participated in a really well-managed joint session. And sometimes you can talk to lawyers about the benefits of doing it if the mediator thinks it's appropriate. And sometimes people will buy in and sometimes they won't. Sometimes I'll say to people, look, let's give it a try. And if at any point in the joint session you think that this is really going badly, and perhaps I'm not perceiving that somebody is seething under their skin, but you can tell that your client's getting very agitated, just look at me funny, make a funny face at me, and I'll know that it's time to call it off. So
Great,
giving
thanks.
people a safe word, if you will, is can be part of the process as well.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
And just to follow up on that, Jeff, it almost sounds like there's a subspecies of these joint sessions you use, which is just you and the lawyers. I mean, is that something that you utilize for them to just argue the points when the broader joint session might not be effective? Then you can sort of take that argument back into the room with the client?
Yes, I think that one of the beauties of mediation is the fluidity of the process, and that we can have different people meet with different other people as appropriate. It's rarely appropriate for mediator to ask to speak to the client outside the presence of the lawyer. That turns most lawyers into your enemies and makes the lawyers think, well, what are they talking about? They're probably talking about me, and they're probably not saying such nice things. Otherwise, why do I have to be excluded from the conversation? And there's very little in it for a mediator to make a lawyer the enemy of your enemy and the enemy of the process. With that said, one configuration that I often find helpful is to call the lawyers apart from their clients and talk about, well, at the beginning of the day, you might say, I don't think there's really an agreement on what our agenda is for the day. What are the most important issues here? What do we really need to discuss? What degree of involvement do you want your clients to have? Do you want them participating in the conversations, not participating? If talking about all those sorts of issues at the beginning of the day can be very helpful. As the day goes on, if you have deadlocks and impasses, a little lawyer summit might be very helpful. David, you've been demanding $1 million for about 2 hours now. And Michael, you've been offering $75,000 for about 2 hours now. All right, my friends, it's not going to settle for 1 million. It's not going to settle for 75. What do we want to do here? David, what do you need from Michael in order to get your client to move more? Michael, what do you need from David in order to get your client to move more? And all sorts of creative ideas can come up. And lawyers can drop little hints to each other about where if you do this, I might do that, whatever it happens to be. And of course, those conversations have to be normalized in the eyes of the client so that the client doesn't think that people are in cahoots working against them. What it is that mediations have collaborative as well as competitive aspects to them. Again, one side can't settle unless the other side settles too. There has to be a degree of collaboration in addition to the degree of competition to get the best deal possible for your respective clients. And so I might say to clients at the very beginning of the day that one of the things we sometimes do is have conversations among the lawyers. It's not for purposes of keeping secrets from you. It's simply one tool that we use in mediation to try to generate progress when things seem to be slowing down or stuck. And once clients understand that, they they may think it's a good idea. They may not think it's a good idea. They may say, no, I want to be in on everything. And that's okay too. We customize every process for the needs of the people who were there that day.
Fantastic. So following up, let's say you get to the end of the day and the case hasn't settled. And one of the things that lawyers tell you when you're out there speaking with them about their experiences in mediation is that they really value a mediator who is effective at follow-up and stays on the case. And it's probably easy to think about follow-up just means trading numbers and trying to bridge a gap, but I wonder if you could speak to your approach towards follow-up and some of the techniques you use and what you explore to see if you can get a case settled.
Yes, following up can mean all kinds of things, and following up becomes more and more important every year because particularly in more complicated cases, um, it becomes more and more rare for cases to settle on the first day of mediation. You often have people uh, who are looking for really fabulous 24 karat gold results, and they may just not be possible, but people need to try to get that 24 karat result and exhaust themselves doing it before they start to consider possibilities which may be pretty good for them and also good enough for the other side to be acceptable. And that doesn't always take place between 9 and 5. Sometimes people say, well, how come so few cases settle on the first day of mediation? And my response to that is, well, the miracle really is that so many cases settle on the first day of mediation because you have people who've been entrenched for months or perhaps years in a particular view of the case. And in the mediation, we're trying to get them to consider more seriously options they hadn't considered seriously before. And to get that to happen in 8 or 10 hours with people who've been in litigation with a particular worldview of the case for months or years, boy, every time we do that, it's miraculous. So there are plenty of cases where it takes longer than just the mediation day for people to realize, you know what, if I pay a little more, if I take a little less, maybe all the other benefits of settlement really do outweigh the disappointment I feel in the financial term. The benefits of finality, eliminating the possibility of an extreme adverse result in litigation, eliminating the financial wear and tear of litigation, eliminating the emotional wear and tear of litigation, the distraction that people feel when they're dealing with the past through litigation rather than working on and planning their futures, which is what they can spend more time doing when litigation is behind them. So following up is important. Generally, I follow up with the lawyers. If we haven't settled, I'll ask, how soon would it be appropriate for me to follow up with you? And every case takes its own course. As a mediator, I wish it would be call me tomorrow. We'll be ready to do some different things tomorrow. And there are indeed some cases where somebody just needs to sleep on it or talk to a spouse or whatever. And there are other cases where the follow-up takes a year and people need to go through additional discovery and really find out how is this witness going to testify. They really need to make this or that motion before the judge to get clarification on some important issue. It can take months and months. It can take a year. Very complex cases, it can even take longer than that for people to be at peace with the idea of paying a little more, taking a little less in order to get all the other benefits that settlement provides. That's particularly appropriate where people are coming in early in the life of a case, sometimes not because they freely choose to mediate, but because a judge or a court system requires them to mediate at a very early stage when they're not ready. Denial, anger, acceptance, and they're still very much in anger. They're not emotionally ready to put it behind them.
And are there specific questions or things you do through that follow-up process to try and add value, to try and get them to a place where this conversation can continue?
Every case is different, David. I
Yeah.
generally start with open-ended questions. What's been going on in the case? Is there anything going on that gives you uh, some optimism that maybe now is the time to settle? What can I do to help you right now? And it's through that process of conversation that customized courses of conduct will emerge, and customization will return to that theme over and over and over again. You have to be ready, willing, and able to customize what you do to the particular needs of people in every particular case.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have a question for you, Jeff. I call this the silent client problem. So the lawyer seems to have instructed the client not to speak or engage, but the lawyer isn't being very helpful or collaborative. You're in the mediation, you see this dynamic happening. Do you try to draw out the client in the hopes that it will change the dynamic? How do you change that dynamic when the lawyer is really running everything, but it's not going anywhere, and you think maybe the key is bringing the client more into the process?
That's an excellent question, and I think it occurs more on the issue arises more on the plaintiff side than on the defense side. And I think it arises more in consumer type cases than commercial business to business cases. So if you have a plaintiff, a consumer type plaintiff in an employment or personal injury case, for example, and the lawyer doesn't seem interested in having the client participate that much, the first question is, well, what is the lawyer thinking? And if the lawyer has hired you, the hired mediation, is that the lawyer is comfortable being candid with the mediator to a degree and being collaborative with the mediator to a degree, then you can have a conversation, perhaps outside of the client's presence, and say, I think it might be helpful if we had this go on where uh, your client does this or that. And the lawyer may have very good reasons why the client is not participating more actively. When I do mediation trainings, one role play that I really like to use with people is Paulsgraf versus Long Island Railroad. You remember that case, perhaps fondly, perhaps not so fondly from your first year torts class. And Mrs. Paulsgraf standing on the platform at the Jamaica station of the Long Island Railroad, and he's getting on to the train, and one of the porters pushes him from behind, and he drops a package, and it turns off that it's fireworks or explosives, and there's commotion on the platform, and the scale falls and hits Mrs. Paulsgraf, and she sues the Long Island Railroad for her personal injuries. And uh, I've done role plays of Paulsgraf many, many times. And there's a wonderful essay about the case called The Passengers of Paulsgraf, written by former Ninth Circuit Judge John Noonan in his great book, Persons and Masks of the Law. And Mrs. Paulsgraf, among her other attributes, stuttered. She had a speech impediment. And so when we do the role play of Paulsgraf, Mrs. Paulsgraf usually sits there quiet because she's very self-conscious of her speech impediment. And if a mediator were to say, "Hey, I want to force Mrs. Paulsgraf to speak or do participate," had many lawyers for Mrs. Paulsgraf say, "Look, she's very self-conscious about her speech impediment, and she is not comfortable speaking even to you, and certainly not the representatives of the Long Island Railroad, all there in their three-piece suits and looking very intimidating to Mrs. Paulsgraf." Paulsgraf uh, was an immigrant from Germany. She English was her second language. She was not exactly a sophisticated user of the legal system. So a lawyer is there to protect a client like Mrs. Paulsgraf. And if Mrs. Paulsgraf is not comfortable speaking, well, I don't think it's right of a mediator to try to force her to, or to certainly to force her to speak over a lawyer's objections, which may be very well founded, as they could be in the Paulsgraf case. So I keep that in mind, and I try to be collaborative with the lawyers and say, if we're not going anywhere, we're not going anywhere. I have some ideas, maybe you have some ideas. What can we do to try to generate some progress here? That might be a good time for a meeting among the lawyers. say, look, we've been going for several hours. We don't seem to be generating much progress. I'm sure you're frustrated. I'm frustrated. Let's have an informal brainstorming session here. What can we do to generate some progress? And again, keeping an open mind, being flexible, customizing every case to accentuate the collaborative aspects of the process while always respecting the competitive aspects of the process, oftentimes leads to a breakthrough. And you never know what that breakthrough is going to be.
Well, thank you for reminding me of the Paulsgraph case. I'm going to keep that in mind whenever I see a silent client. I had not, I had not considered the possibility that some clients may be much less comfortable participating in the process, and it's not just the lawyer who is keeping their own client at bay. So that's a really great perspective.
Remember, we're all in Southern California. There are a lot of people here for whom English is not their first language. We're blessed with a diverse population, people from many different countries and cultures here. And you can imagine if you're a consumer type plaintiff and you're not accustomed to being on the 30th floor of some big glass office tower in downtown Los Angeles or whatever city you're in, and you're with a bunch of lawyers and people in suits, and it's not your day-to-day milieu, that person, that plaintiff might be very uh, anxious and really looking to their lawyer to protect them. So every case is different. One thing I like to do when people come up the elevator in the morning or log on to the Zoom, you're mediating on Zoom or whatever online platform you're using, is let's have had a conversation with the lawyers beforehand and we say, okay, we're going to have joint session. It's going to be limited in time. It's going to be limited in subject, and it ought to go okay. I like to meet with each side, lawyer, client, team, privately at the very beginning of the day because I want to make sure that the plan is still the plan and that no last minute complications have come up. And I also want to uh, establish some chemistry and some rapport with the clients to the extent I can. And I'll ask the clients if it's okay with your lawyer, if there's anything you'd like me to know about the case or about you that would be helpful, make me better able to help you today. If it's okay with your lawyer for you to share your thoughts and feelings, I'm certainly happy to listen to them. If you, Mr. or Miss Client, have any questions about the mediation process or how I go about things, I'm certainly happy to answer your questions. Because remember, at the end of the day, lawyers are going to come to you many times to help them get their client to be at peace with paying a little more, taking a little less, in order to get all the other benefits that settlement provides. And I find if I've taken a few minutes at the beginning of the day to establish some chemistry and rapport with the clients who've never met me before, maybe they've never even been in a mediation before, never been in a lawsuit before. If I can take some time at the beginning of the mediation day to establish some chemistry and rapport, that chemistry and rapport pays off big time at the end of the day when I'm helping the lawyer come to a decision that the lawyer's recommending, which the lawyer sincerely believes is in the client's best interest. I think almost all the lawyers with whom I've worked over my more or less 30-year career as a mediator have their client's best interests at heart and are working really hard to get the best deal possible for their clients. And the recommendations to the clients are almost always very sound and completely in line with the client's best interests.
Right. Thank you. David, how are we doing on time? Are we ready for the quick fire lightning round?
Yeah, for sure. We've got about 10 minutes to go. And so maybe playing off of what you were just speaking on, Jeff, you were talking about some things you like to do with clients that are effective. What are some of the third rails to stay away from? Some things that are not effective in mediations. You mentioned don't negotiate for the parties. Anything else that comes to mind in terms of things that can really make a mediation go off the rails?
Well, don't force people to do things that they don't want to do. If they don't want to have a particular, don't want to make a particular offer demand, if they don't want to meet in a particular configuration, rarely is it a good idea to force them. One of the maxims by which we live is the right answer at the wrong time is the wrong answer. And sometimes as mediators, we can say, oh my gosh, if this case is going to settle, it's going to settle matter about X. You can just tell. You can just tell. But to blurt it out prematurely, it can be poisonous in a mediation. Uh, Trying to uh, get into an argument with a lawyer in the presence of a client, usually a counterproductive thing to do. Again, using force, any force other than the force of logic in a mediation is generally a misuse of force.
Okay, so I'm going to go off script here. This is not a prepared quick fire question, but you get a phone call and someone wants to interview you as a possible mediator, right? And they're talking to a few different mediators and you're getting your call and they say, "Give me the elevator pitch. Why should I choose you over the other guy or these other people? You're all super qualified. Why Jeff?" How do
So I
you,
tell
how do
people there are
you,
three things.
yes.
There are three things that I urge people to keep in mind when selecting a mediator. One is one that is usually overrated, but it's still important. Subject matter expertise. Does the mediator have some understanding of the territory in which you're operating? If you don't have to know every jot and tittle about the area of law, but if you know the general parameters of the field of law, and then you get good briefs from the clients, from the lawyers about the details of the particular case, you can get up to speed pretty quickly. If you know nothing about patent law or construction law or whatever it happens to be, it can be very concerning for lawyers to feel they have to get you up to speed from absolute square one.
Right.
At the same time, uh, sometimes if you know too much about an area of law, it means that you've gotten that information by being on one side of the V or the other, and you may not be as neutral as you think you are. So, yeah, some subject matter knowledge, but being the expert in the field, I don't think is really necessary. The second thing I think people should look for is mediation skill. Is the person a skilled mediator? Now, if somebody is a known commodity and they're an established quality mediator and they've been a professional mediator making a living doing this for 10, 20, 30 years, whatever, then the person almost certainly has mediation skill. The best proxy for mediation skill, I believe, is asking whether the mediator is comfortable figuring out when to have a joint session and then managing it appropriately. That's the second thing people should look for. And the third thing is the personality of the mediator. You're not going to get along great with everybody. You're not going to hit it off with everybody. Personality is going to be delightful to some people, and you're just not going to click with others. So I ask lawyers to um, to size me up and the other mediators. Do the lawyers think that the mediator will be able to get on wavelength with their client, with the opposing counsel, with the client on the other side, well enough to establish the rapport and chemistry you need? So those are the things that I try to emphasize, that I know something about the subject matter, that I have mediated cases in the area before or in areas that are sufficiently adjacent that I'll be able to get to see well enough, and that I've been doing it a long time and I have the flexibility and the skill. And then that X factor is really the personality.
Right.
If you think I'll be able to get on wavelength with everybody, I'm the right mediator for you. If not, then there's no one mediator who's perfect for every case. Those are the things I think people should take into account.
Great.
Jeff, how about like give us one brilliant move that you pulled in a mediation that you think really helped get a case settled, maybe unexpectedly, a question to ask, something where you got things to pivot.
Well, I'll tell you not about something that I did, but about something a lawyer once did in a case that I thought was
Great.
absolutely brilliant. Um, it was early in my career, I did a lot of employment cases. I don't do that many anymore. I still do a few, but it was a very, very tense mediation where it was a racial discrimination case, and uh, the uh, the defense lawyer was African American, and there was some resentment from the plaintiff's side that an African American lawyer would be defending such a case. And it was really, I mean, the lawyers, I was meeting with the lawyers apart from the clients, and it was getting very intense. And the lawyer for the defense looks the lawyer for the plaintiff in the eye, and I think, gee, are these guys gonna take swings at each other? What's going on? This is getting very intense. And one lawyer says, uh, tell me about your family. Do you have children? I two, how many kids do you have? And I thought, whoa, well, that's quite a bold move, different. I didn't expect that at all. And the plaintiff's lawyer almost didn't know how to answer the question. Like, what's the catch? And he says, I've got 3 kids. And the defense lawyer says, really? Well, that's great. My kids are thus and so ages. How old are your kids? And the plaintiff's lawyer goes, again, defensively, well, my kids are 8 and 10, whatever it happened to be. It's a long time ago. And through that humanization, those few questions of humanization, they were able to return to the process of bargaining, and we ultimately got the case settled. And one thing that taught me is not to be afraid to introduce a human element, and always remember you're dealing with human beings. You're not just dealing with facts and numbers, and you're not just dealing with statutes and cases. You're dealing with human beings, and everybody deserves to be treated respectfully and treated as the unique human being they are. And what I learned in that one particular mediation from that, I thought was a very creative and courageous question from that lawyer. Really taught me a lot.
Okay, so do we have time for one more, or how are we doing
Maybe
here?
a minute left. Why don't you take us home, Michael?
Okay, so biggest gap that closed to your surprise. You talked earlier about 75 and a million. Have you seen 1 million and 20 million? Where, when you in your mind, you were going, this is never going to close, and then like the next thing you know, the settlement agreement is being drawn up.
Give us some hope, right?
I, yeah, people, millions and millions of dollars apart. And yet I say to myself, well, they're here. They must think we're capable of doing something productive. Some good can come out of it. And they've not only paid me, but they've paid their lawyers a lot of money to draft these briefs, and sometimes get on airplanes and pay the lawyers their handsome hourly rates to show up. So they're here for something good to happen. And again, it's just asking questions. How can I be most helpful to you? What would you like to see happen right now? what would you like to see happen right? Well, they should move by this many dollars, whatever. That's great. Let me ask you, what do you think we can do to try to get them to make that move? And well, maybe if I moved, maybe they would move, something like that. And again, it's through the Socratic method. It's through questioning and not telling people what to do. As the apocryphal fortune cookie says, you don't have to work very hard to convince people of the wisdom of their own ideas. And so drawing ideas out of them those ideas are much more likely to be successful than ideas that I impose on people. They usually come up with great ideas, and I try to help them.
Well, I think we have gotten the wisdom we were looking for here, David. That's just
Yeah.
fantastic.
Man, what a great note to end it on. So many important things to consider, and I think take back to our own processes and think about how we're doing things. And Jeff, thank you so much for being so gracious and generous with sharing all this wisdom that you've learned
Absolutely.
over many years and through many hard-fought mediations as
You're very,
well.
oh, you're very welcome, guys. It's a pleasure working with both of you on the Will Work for Food project. Great working with Jean Lawler and Natalie Armstrong-Motan as well. And I hope people, if they're in a position to contribute to leket.org, a leading food bank in Israel, or food bank in their own community, or one that's otherwise important to them. Thank you very much. And I guess with that, we are complete, eh?
I think that'll do it. Thanks,
Yes,
everybody.
thank you very much. That was
Yeah.
great.
Okay.